You know, in the wise words of Christopher Lee.
I've been looking forward to this.
Hey everyone, down here, and welcome to a video that I've been looking forward to doing for quite a while now. It's another director ranking, and this time we're looking at the films of this guy, Quentin Tarantino. So as I say, I've been looking forward to doing this one for a long time, you know, because Tarantino is a real favourite filmmaker of mine. And that probably does sound like every teenage film bro ever, but there is a reason that people love him, including myself. I mean, it is undeniable the impact that he's had on cinema over the past 30 odd years. You know, he's one of these like modern filmmakers. He's one of the most prominent modern filmmakers who, by name recognition alone, can get bums into seats. And he does have such a unique voice, you know, with the kinds of stories he tells, and also how he tells them as well, you know, with his non-linear fragmented storytelling, the way he depicts characters is kind of morally grey. I find it just really interesting, but they're also really entertaining. And the core of it, the core reason I enjoy Tarantino films is because they're really entertaining, they are really fun, and you can just feel, for me anyway, you can feel the passion and enthusiasm that he has for cinema. You can really feel that, and that's what makes him really almost endearing as a viewer. And he's a director that I've absolutely wanted to cover on one of these like rankings for a bit now. And considering that, you know, we've had news of his recent supposedly final film, The Movie Critic, being scrapped, what better time to talk about it than now? Because now we don't have to worry about, you know, or will this list become out of date? Because we will never know when his next / last film comes out. We don't know at this point. But let's not worry about the potential future of Tarantino. Let's look at the past and rank the 10 feature films that he's directed. So before we get on with the ranking, I just want to go over some like criteria of what counts for the list and how I'm ranking and such. So as I say, it's the 10 feature films that he's directed. So I'm not including films that he's written but not directed. So stuff like True Romance or From Dusk Till Dawn. Yeah, he wrote them but he didn't direct them, so I'm not going to be including them on the list. Secondly, regarding the Kill Bill duology, obviously there's the kind of debate of, do you count them as one film or do you separate them? Now, with how the list is actually panned out, I will be talking about them kind of as a whole as one, because they do actually happen to sit next to each other in the ranking. But I will obviously make it clear as to which one I prefer, because I do have a preference. And finally, it's just my opinion. I know Tarantino fans can be very passionate about how they film, and you know, this is mostly going to be a positive video, so it's mostly nothing but love for Tarantino and his movies. So just bear that in mind. Don't throw a hissy fit in the comments. You know, as Mr. Pink said, we are professionals, aren't we? Isn't that right? You know. So at the bottom, I was kind of umming and ahhing between two films, and they're the only two Tarantino films I consider kind of mediocre. But if that's the lowest he's ever gotten, that kind of shows how strong of a director he is. But ultimately, at the bottom spot, I've gone with The Hateful Eight, which I don't know if I can call his worst film, but it's definitely my least favourite, and it's the one that I enjoyed the least, and it's the one that I got the least out of. Now, the reason I was kind of a bit sceptical of putting it in the bottom spot, because it does have some real technical merit. I think the cinematography is great, you know, really luscious and crisp, and, you know, all the widescreen stuff. It's a really nice looking film, you know, all the snowy landscapes, it's great. Ennio Morricone's score is fantastic, probably the best part of the film. It's really strong at building tension, and the performances, I think, are really good. Some great acting from like Kurt Russell, Jennifer Jason Leigh, Sam Jackson, you know, really great cast overall. But I just don't enjoy watching this film, and it can be attributed to one thing: the length. It's 3 hours long and takes place in like 2 locations. Now, usually I really love minimalist, self-contained stories. I love Inside Number 9, I love 12 Angry Men, but here's the difference though: Inside Number 9 episodes are only about half an hour long. 12 Angry Men is only an hour and a half long. This is 3 hours, and the length just takes the mickey. It doesn't need to be 3 hours long, and there's a reason that you don't tell minimalist stories like this with 3 hours, because it's just meandering, it's just filler and padding, and it's just a load of meandering about with nothing really of note, and it just blurs into one, you know? And there's just really not enough substance to keep me engaged, really. I mean, the characters aren't particularly, you know, revolutionary or interesting or particularly unique. You know, some of the tricks like the chapters or the non-linear storytelling, you know, that recontextualizes things you've already seen. I mean, it's not badly done, but other Tarantino films do that sort of stuff, and, you know, but better as well. And I'd rather go back to any of his other films over this one. This one just does not have any rewatch factor for me. I'm never, unless I'm doing a Tarantino marathon, I'm never going to watch this film again. And that's why it's at the bottom. It is just my least favourite, because I just did not enjoy it, because it's so bloody boring. Okay, so at number 9 I've got Death Proof, which a lot of people I think do consider his weakest film, and for a long time I did too, and I'm not mad on it, but the thing is, it's much more distinct and memorable than The Hateful Eight, and I think even its shortcomings of this film, I think they're more interesting as to why The Hateful Eight doesn't work, because that film, it's just boring. This film, even though, yeah, it is actually kind of boring if I'm being honest, I think there are some distinct moments of quality, and also some interesting areas where it doesn't quite work that are interesting to talk about. As I said, there's some real elements of quality that just stand out even now. I've watched this film about a year and a half ago, and there are still things that stick out to me, mainly like Kurt Russell's stuntman Mike character. He's a really great sort of main character. He's quite menacing, quite creepy, but kind of cool in a way. He's a really enigmatic but really interesting character. A great performance from Kurt Russell. I think the concept of a murderer who kills people through the use of like stunt cars and such, and, you know, to make it appear accidental, it's a creative idea, and obviously it's kind of, you know, Tarantino paying homage to stunt people and whatnot. I mean, you've got Zoe Bell, you know, Uma Thurman's stunt double from Kill Bill as herself in this film, so, you know, and the actual action scenes of the car stunts and those set pieces, they are really, really good. I gotta say, all the stunts, they are fantastically done. But for a lot of the film, it's trying to pay homage to that kind of grindhouse 70s cinema, and I just don't think it works really. I don't think it works with how Tarantino writes films. I think you've got that kind of, you know, postmodern way that Tarantino writes dialogue and writes scenes, combined with this like schlocky, pulpy 70s grindhouse cinema that I just don't think the two blend particularly well, and it doesn't really come across well. It just kind of feels like Tarantino dialogue in a 70s filter. That's kind of just how it feels. And I didn't really get that whole thing, because, you know, the first half of the film, you've got that like retro-y filter, and the second half, it's just like a normal movie. I didn't get what that was going for. So it's either that you commit to it or you don't. It just feels like kind of like this awkward halfway in between sort of scenario. And yeah, it's an experiment that I don't really think paid off particularly well. And it's kind of maybe a bit self-indulgent in the, you know, history of cinema, but it's at least more interesting than Hateful Eight, I think. So that's the bulk of the negativity out of the way. Now onto the good movies, starting with Jackie Brown, which I quite like. I don't love it though. I kind of consider this one almost the baseline Tarantino film, like the bare bones Tarantino film, where he's not really experimenting much. He's more just doing a straightforward crime thriller. But I think that kind of works. It's almost like a double-edged sword. It's like a good thing and a bad thing. It's not great, because it does mean that with his less experimental work, it does kind of make it a bit less memorable, especially coming off the back of Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction. It definitely feels like a significant step down in that way. But in a more positive way, I think, even though it's him kind of doing the bare minimum, if this is the bare minimum and I still find myself enjoying it thanks to the, you know, endearing characters and the dialogue and performances, it shows how strong a filmmaker he is, because I do genuinely enjoy the film. I say it's an enjoyable crime thriller. The dialogue's snappy and witty. I like the characters and the performances. I really like Jackie Brown herself. Pam Grier is very good. I love her little kind of the chemistry she has with Max Cherry, you know, Robert Forster's character. And you've got some great performances. You know, Bob De Niro, Sam Jackson, Michael Keaton. You've got some great performances and such. It's a well-made film. You know, good cinematography, good music and such. There's that really great scene in the shopping mall when it's the same scene played over, but from the 3 different perspectives. That is very much the Tarantino that we all know and love, and, you know, his playing around with story structure. I think that's really interesting. It would have been nice if he could have honed in on that a bit more, but overall, I do like it. I actually do. I find it enjoyable, and I would be up for rewatching it if I was ever told, hey, do you want to watch Jackie Brown? I'd be like, yeah, sure. Also, there's a scene in it where Bob De Niro smokes weed for about 20 seconds straight. So I've just got my letterbox review of here, and that was my opening sentence. Rob De Niro smoked pot for about 20 seconds straight in this film. I completely forgot that he did that. So number 6 and 7, we've got the Kill Bill duology. Now, this is probably going to be my hottest take on the list, and I do really enjoy this duology, but it's probably the Tarantino film I find the most overrated, if I had to pick one to call that. It's no doubt one of his most iconic films, up there with Pulp Fiction, I think. It's definitely up there in terms of iconography, but I don't think it's one of his best, for me personally. And I think with this one, I think there is a kind of style over substance aspect to it, and I think it's a really entertaining set of films, I think. But the homages and the action, you know, it's all really well done. You know, it's such a vibrant film, especially the first one. You know, the action, it's so kinetic, and the colours and the shots, it's all so dynamic and so it's a feast for the eyes. Uma Thurman's performance in both these films, I think, is probably her best acting that she's done. I think she really steals the show in these films. But there is quite a lot, you know. You've got like black and white colour, you've got an anime sequence in the first one with Oren's backstory and whatnot, and it's all really well made, but it is kind of lacking in the substance. I think I felt this most with the first film. I feel like there was something that felt quite incomplete about the thing, and I get that it's a part one, but everybody else seemed to love it even as its own thing, and I was like, am I missing something? This is where we get to part two, which I actually prefer personally to the first film. I think the reason why is because in the second film, you get to see Bill. In the first film, you just sort of hear about him, and I think that kind of rings a bit hollow. It makes the first film ring a bit hollow at points. There's sort of stretches of that film that feel a bit meandering and a bit, I don't know, I didn't really feel the weight of the situation. But I think in the second film I do, because you see Bill more in like flashbacks and such. He interacts with Beatrix, he interacts with Bud and whatnot. It's more tangible, I think, that kind of connection he has with all the characters and such. And so it makes that reunion really impactful. I think that whole final act where, you know, Beatrix reunites with Bill and you know, the daughter, I think it's probably the most emotionally charged stuff that Tarantino's ever done. But the second film just has some really great stuff. I love the duel with Elle Driver. I think Elle Driver is probably the best of the main four antagonists. I think she's really great. She settled really well in the first film with that introduction in the hospital, and in the second film the duel is great. And I love some of those training flashbacks in the second film. You know, with that the heart trick. What's it called? But it's a trick that you see Beatrix learning in those flashbacks when she's training, and you see it when she's getting out of the grave, and then you see it in the two duels between Elle and Bill. I found the second film, I think, a bit more satisfying, so that's why I'd probably have that at number 6 and the first one at number 7. But overall, I think it's a really strong duology, but it does have a kind of style of substance film for me personally. Number 5 is his most recent film, and I've got the poster for it here, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, which I really enjoyed. And I actually remember this one coming out, and I remember seeing trailers for it. I was obviously a bit too young to watch it at the time, but I really enjoyed this one. It's one that has definitely gotten better as time's gone on, I think. I do think there are some flaws in the film. I think it is a bit long. I think it can be a bit indulgent at points with kind of love letter to cinema. I think Margot Robbie as Sharon Tate, she could have done more, because she is really great in the role. I wish we got to see more of her. But I really enjoyed this one. There's a real warm, nostalgic, cozy feeling and atmosphere to this film, and it's a real love letter to cinema. And you feel that passion, you know, Tarantino's passion for cinema in this film, I think. Even though I think it's a bit long, I don't really find the film boring. I just really enjoy spending time in this world with these characters that Tarantino has created. You know, I love the dynamic between Rick Dalton and Cliff Booth. You know, DiCaprio and Pitt are fantastic. They have great chemistry together. I think they're all great. I love the culture of, you know, 60s LA, 60s Hollywood, that kind of era, and also how it links to kind of the Manson sort of stuff. I think it's just a really interesting point in history that I personally really love. It looks absolutely gorgeous, that sort of those warm colours and the sun and all. It's just such a vibrant, gorgeous looking film. All the kind of recreations of like the sets and all the old sort of movies, I think is really, really cool to see. There is almost like a dreamlike, surreal, like nostalgic quality to the film. I mean, there's moments where you'll have the sort of the characters who are actors in the film, they will be shooting a scene and the camera crew sort of disappear until, you know, cut is called. And there's something, it's not obvious, but when you notice it, it's like, that's a bit odd. But I really like that. That's a bit that stuck out for me personally. And then there's that brilliant ending. It's really suspenseful, like really kind of creepy and atmospheric as well. And also as well, when all the violence ensues, it is just bonkers. And I think some of its ideas of like, I mean, Tarantino does this a lot with kind of how he depicts morality in his films. I think the way you kind of have the morality of Cliff and Rick under the guise of supposed heroism, which obviously Rick as an actor, he does these acts in a heroic way, although is what he does at the end heroic. I think that's kind of interesting, and a kind of interesting spin on the kind of idea of morality that is in a lot of his films. And I suppose that the impact of cinema is something that kind of was definitely in his earlier films in a more homage sort of way, but here with some of his later films like this and another film we'll get to in a second, it's very much the text. It's part of the text, and I really like that evolution. I love these later Tarantino films that explore those ideas in new, interesting, fresh ways. But overall, I really just enjoy Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I would really want to rewatch it again. And number 4, I've got Django Unchained, which is just it's probably one of the most unhinged and bonkers Tarantino films. It's really out there and crazy, but I love it. It's really bold, and I admire that, and I think it's a fantastic film overall. I think there's so much merit to the film. I think the writing's great, the music and such. The filmmaking, I think, is some of Tarantino's best. It's one of his best looking films. The shots are so gorgeous, and the colours, and it's so crisp, and I love the environments. I think it's all just captured really well. I think it's probably the best use of violence in his films, because that's a bit of a trademark of his, but I think the way his violence is used in this film is quite interesting, and depending on who the character is that is being attacked and such, the violence is interesting in that regard. And what I mean by that is with the racist characters, basically, like characters like Calvin and such, the violence is very exaggerated, right? But with the slaves, there's something more dignified. It's more raw and realistic and more brutal. I would argue there's something more dignified about that, and I think it's a really interesting distinction. I think the way he does it, I think, is really interesting. I mean, the story is ultimately a simple, slavery revenge story with a bit of romance in there. I think it's really a strong, simple but effective story, and the characters really make it. I mean, Django is so cool. Like, Jamie Foxx is amazing. Christoph Waltz Schultz is fantastic. I love the dynamic between those two. It's a great double act. Calvin Candy is one of the best villains that Tarantino has done. Leo DiCaprio is fantastic in the role. He's such a love-to-hate villain. You love to hate this smug bastard, and he's funny, he's flamboyant, but then it does make it scary when he snaps at points. I think it's a brilliant performance, yeah. And Steven, Sam Jackson's character, he's a great secondary villain as well. I think they both really great antagonists and really, horrible bastards. It's also weirdly funny in like a really dark way. There's some really quite good bits of comedy. That's pretty, but it's more like dark humor, like with that bit with everyone, Big Daddy and all his lot with, the mask and they can't see it. There's something really funny about that in a kind of dark way. My only real issue with the film, I think it's the pacing. I think that in the final act mainly, where it does sort of plod along to a conclusion. It's that part, where they meet like Tarantino's character and after all the stuff at Calvin's mansion, all the chaos at his mansion, there's that sort of chunk that to sort of meander a bit after that, and it does sort of bring the pace of the film down to a halt. But overall, I think it's a really strong film. In third place, we have his most iconic film, Pulp Fiction, which everybody knows and loves, and this has a bit of a special honour as being the only one of this list that I've studied in my film class that I've mentioned. But we've studied this one, and we've only just finished studying it, so this is very fresh in my mind. Pulp Fiction is. I have a real kind of grasp of why I think it works so well. I will say that I do kind of feel it's a bit of a shame with kind of almost the reputation of the film. It's so beloved, right, that often a lot of conversations kind of shut down because it's almost like oh yeah, Pulp Fiction's amazing, but you all know why it's amazing, and it kind of kills the conversation then, and I think that's a shame. So even if some of these points are things you've heard parroted about for the past 30 years, I'm going to say why I love the movie. It really is the Tarantino film. His mission statement is clear here. I think, the non-linear storytelling, his fragmented way of structuring the story, his loose idea of like morality, the violence in the movie, the criminal underworld, all this kind of stuff. It's really well made and really well put together, but I just find it really entertaining. It strikes that perfect balance between intelligence and being really entertaining to watch. I mean, on a first watch, it is really fun to kind of piece together what order does the film go in. It requires you to really engage in the film, and I really enjoy that. Stuff like the briefcase, it makes you think and whatnot. These cool enigmas, I really enjoy that. But the characters I just really find endearing. Vincent and Jules, they have such a great chemistry. Travolta and Jackson, they are magnetic together. Uma Thurman as Mia, she's great. I like Butch. There's some other great incidental characters like Christopher Walken's one scene. He's really memorable. There's Honey Bunny and Pumpkin. They're a really great, crazy, bonkers duo. There's the Wolf. He's awesome. I just love all the characters and whatnot. And what I love about how the film portrays them is how your alignment can kind of shift, especially with Vincent, because he's arguably the main character. He's the one that kind of links Jules, Mia, and Butch, right? And when you see him, with Mia, when you see him with Jules, you enjoy him because you're aligned with him. You enjoy him, he's endearing, he's likeable, there's a Royale with cheese and all that sort of stuff. Then when you see him through Butch's perspective, he's just a background hitman, and that perspective shifts. And a lot of films can allude to people's places in the world and whatnot, and kind of how others will perceive you. This really does feel like you see that in practice, when Vince dies, I've heard criticism that, you don't feel emotional about that, but I don't think that's a problem, in my opinion anyway. I don't think that's a problem. I think it just shows how different somebody's perspective can be on a character depending on how you view it. I just find that really interesting. Stuff like the mysterious briefcase and like the divine intervention stuff I find fascinating. And I think you almost feel like you're just on the edge of something beyond our imagining, you know, beyond this modern world of 90s LA. And I just find that fascinating personally. I find it so gripping and interesting, and I just love it. But yeah, overall I just find it really entertaining as well. So, you know. At number 2, we have Inglorious Basterds, which this is one that really does get better the more I think back on it. I adore this one. It's probably Tarantino's most polished film. I think this is just the whole package, really. Something I kind of noticed about this film when you compare it to the rest of his films. So you have the 2 Kill Bills and you have Death Proof, where I feel like for me personally, Tarantino at that point was kind of getting a bit self-indulgent with his style over substance sort of stuff, you know, really homages, all these homages to, you know, cinema and whatnot. I think it was getting a little bit indulgent, and I feel like with this film, you see a real kind of course correction. You see a sense of he's really trying to shift the sort of game here. You know, he's trying to really go in a new, fresh direction, you know, with a more polished approach to his films, and you know, you still got similar themes. You know, you've got these kind of homages to cinema, the kind of impact of cinema on people. You know, with the whole plot of it being about the Nazi propaganda films, and you know how the climax is at the cinema where they're showing one of these propaganda films and whatnot, and you know with Goebbels and that kind of thing. You know, but it's taking his love for cinema and doing it in a different way and showing it in a different way and telling that in a different. I just think it's a really great new, fresh direction for him to go in with his films. I think the chapters as well, you know, that's something that a lot of his films do, but I think that does help to kind of distinguish all these characters, because it is very much an ensemble piece. You've got the Bastards with what's his name, Brad Pitt and all his gang. You've got Michael Fassbender, you've got Melanie Laurent, you've got Diane Kruger, all these different characters, and yeah, a lot of them end up dying, and I think there is something kind of interesting about that. There is ultimately in war no good side or bad side necessarily, depending on who you are. You know, it's a morally grey area, and again, it's that point of Tarantino's films being morally, you know, having morally grey characters. But somebody who definitely is not morally grey is Colonel Hans Landa, played by Christoph Waltz, who might take the cake for me as my favourite movie antagonist. I often find myself recently citing him as a great example of what to do if you want to make a great antagonist. You know, there's something so scary about him, but so subtly, he feels real. He feels like a real person, and that's what makes him scary. That a person is capable of this evil. And you know, when towards the end, when the monster is unleashed, in a sense, there's one scene towards the end that made me flinch, because he's genuinely that scary and intimidating, and that's how you do a villain. So many phenomenal sequences in this film. You know, obviously the opening scene when Landa visits the family. There's the tavern sequence, which is just a perfect bit of suspense. In fact, I used that same gun under the table technique for one of my first short films for school. You know, I use that same technique. You've got that outrageous, bombastic climax, which really almost feels like the blueprint for you know, Tarantino's modern films. This is kind of the start of that modern era of Tarantino films in my eyes. I just think this is amazing, absolutely amazing, but didn't quite get to number 1. But in first place, to the surprise of nobody who watches my channel regularly, Reservoir Dogs. I adore this film, and it's for me, no question, his best, even though it's his first. Like how he did this, his first film, just right out the gate, made it amazing. I think is incredible. But I think there's a testament that there's a real raw energy and passion for cinema in this film that you can really feel. It feels like Tarantino, this is like, it's almost like his millions to one shot to make a movie, and he just didn't pull any punches. He just went for it, and it works. It crushes. And in fact, I rewatched it this year, you know, not necessarily because of this video, but just because I wanted to rewatch it, and I still loved it and found new ways of loving it, different ways of loving it. But on that first watch, I felt every emotion under the sun. I felt it was funny, it was tense, it was horrible, it was nasty, it was heart-poundingly tense at points. You know, the ending is phenomenal. So many Tarantino-isms in this film, you know, his dialogue, his violence, his morally grey characters, his music is awesome, you know. That's, I think, one of the reasons why my parents wanted me to watch this originally, because of some of the great songs in the movie. I think they loved it for that reason. And to see the blueprint for Tarantino film, to see the genesis of it all here, it's really exciting to see. There's almost like a humbleness to this film that, you know, as his directorial debut, I think there's something really special about that. The characters are just so great, you know. Mr. White is, Harvey Keitel's great, you know, the bond with Mr. Orange, almost father-son bond, I think it's just a great dynamic, and obviously his parallels with Joe and Eddie as an actual father-son duo. You've got the slimy Mr. Pink, he's really effective. You've got the sadistic Mr. Blonde, he's horrible. Even Tarantino's character, Mr. Brown, I actually think he's actually a decent character in the film. Non-linear storytelling, I think, is really great, and something I appreciate more on rewatch of the flashbacks and almost the construct of telling a story with Mr. Orange's character. and whatnot. And I think there's just something great about how that's explored, and I just love it. But ultimately, the best part of the film is just how tight and concise and focused this film is. It's not indulgent in any way, I don't think. It's just straight to the point, gets to it, and does it spectacularly. And it is one of those early films as well that really got me into film. You know, stuff like this, stuff like Alien, Seven, you know, these kind of films that really got me into cinema, you know, early on. And it's a very special film to me in that regard. It is one of my all-time favourites, definitely in my top 15 of all movies, to be honest. I just love it. So, yeah, I did a Tarantino ranking, and I've got to say, I really enjoyed doing that. I really enjoyed talking about all the movies that I love, especially sort of towards the top half of the list. I really enjoyed doing that, and it's just, I do love a lot of his films, really, I really do. And I do think it is a little bit of a shame that he's wanting to kind of scrap his movie critic project and trying to limit himself to just 10 movies. I think that's it is a bit limiting, because, I mean, you know, there's so many stories that I think you'd want to tell as a filmmaker. There's so, you're always bursting with stories, you know, and I get the idea if you want to go on a high note and whatnot, and I get that, but I think, you know, I think just kind of go for it. If it ultimately isn't your last film, you know, but I think I wish you would have gone for that. It's a shame. But either way, hope you enjoyed it. Be sure to like, subscribe, all that great stuff, and until the next time, you take care and have a great day. Bye bye.